This is a Dell Precision T1650 workstation. I wanted to do a quick teardown, and actually I'm doing this one as an upgrade for a customer. I get a lot, it seems like whenever I do these, there's a lot of questions about video cards, power supplies, memory, things like that. So I'm actually going to do that in this. I'm going to show how it's set up from the factory, and then I'm going to show what you can do to actually upgrade this and the types of parts that are ideal to be used. So let's get started here. So I'm going to go over the outside first. So this has quite a few options. Oops. Let's see if I can make that a little more visible. There we go. So this has quite a few options from the start. You've got 6 USBs in the back. 2 of them are USB 3.0 ports. It does have just your standard audio output. It does have a serial port. This is probably one of the newer machines you're going to find with a serial port. It's got your standard VGA, and then it also has 2 DisplayPort outs, so it can definitely run a multiple monitor setup even without a video card. And then it's got your standard Ethernet port and your PS2, which you're really not going to be using anymore, but they are there. On the front of this unit, it has, if I can get that in the camera here, dang it. Okay, there we go. Okay, so this has on the front 2 USB 2.0 ports. I'm sorry, 2 USB 3.0 ports and 2 USB 2.0 ports. The top 2 are 3.0, the bottom 2 are 2.0. And then typically, I think I've seen one or two of them without it, but typically you're going to see these configured with a CD DVD burner combo drive, unless for whatever reason it was configured without it, which typically they're not, but they can be, I believe. So to open this unit up, it's very simple. It's just a handle. You literally pull up, and the entire top panel comes out. So typically I like to pull SATA cables first, just so I can get everything out of the way. Let's see here. So, from the factory, these have a capable, but it's decent quality power supply, but it's nothing crazy. If you plan on adding a video card, I would definitely add a more capable power supply. So I think from... Okay, so this one actually isn't bad. Some of these you see, there'll be something absolutely ridiculous, you know, 250 watts or something like that. This one's 320, so I think in theory, depending on a few factors, in theory this would probably support something like a 1050 Ti video card. I mean, you can never have too much power supply, but I would say in theory you could probably drop a 1050 Ti in this without seeing a problem. What else? 4 RAM slots, 2 PCIe X16s, although I'm 90% certain that this unit will not support SLI. I think it's primarily there for, like, if you want to run dual workstation grade video cards, like say you wanted to run, like a pair of Quadro K2000s, something along those lines, where it's more about the number of outputs than it is performance. I'm guessing you could get Crossfire to work with it, just because Crossfire is a little more open-ended than SLI, but that's just a guess. I'd have to do it to know. And then you do have a single PCIe 1X and a single standard legacy PCI, which is actually really nice to have because we all end up with fairly nice high-end but older PCIe, or not PCIe, PCI devices. It's always nice to, if they have Windows 10 compatibility, to be able to do that. So The first thing I'm going to do with this, also, I guess I'll go over a few more things internally. So, it does have 4 SATA ports. Nothing crazy, pretty standard for a mid-range board. Some of them have 6, but 4 is pretty standard. With the size of individual drives these days and the size of SSDs, you don't really need more than 4. It's always nice to have, but you don't actually need it. It does have a unused front panel style USB 2.0 header, which could be nice if you decide to add something like a memory card reader, something along those lines, or I mean any other USB device that would go to the front. It's definitely nice to have it. It's also ideal to have if for whatever reason you decide to pull the board out of the case. The 4 front USB ports are connected to this. Dang it. Out of the way. Okay. The 4 front USBs are connected to this cable with this proprietary end piece on them. But with these 2 front panel ports right here, in theory, you could put the board in a normal case and still have access to its front panel USB 2s. The USB 3 for the front panel is a standard USB 3 header. I guess this is one of those cases where without actually doing it, because sometimes even with the standard connector, I have seen them be proprietary. So without actually putting the board in another case, I wouldn't know for sure. But in theory, this does have universal front panel USB 3.0. Give me just a second here. I got to refocus the camera. It looks like it's getting out of... maybe not. Okay. I think we're good here. I think I accidentally just took a picture with it. Okay, what are we doing next? This unit does have both of the modular hard drive sleds in it. A lot of times you'll get these without these. A lot of times what happens is businesses that have these units on hand, when they pull the hard drives, they don't even think about the fact that these are not part of the hard drive, and they just go bye-bye with the drive. So luckily this one has them, so it'll make my life a little bit easier on configuring this unit. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to pull a few components just to show how it's done. Since this particular machine, I'm already going to be doing it anyway. So for this machine, this is going to be an upper level gaming desktop. I think I was going to sell this one just slightly sub $500, which for what this is going to be, I mean, look, I get there's always that person that says, oh, I can get it cheaper. But for what this is on the open market, this is going to be an i7 3770, 12 gigs of RAM with a GTX 1060 3 gig video card. It's going to have an SSD and 256 gig SSD. And for that, it's sub $500 is not bad for that much computer. To build something brand new, with similar quality and level of components, but brand new ones, I've done the math, and it's usually something like $1,000. Yeah, I know there's always somebody that'll tell me, oh, you can get this cheaper, that cheaper, but to build a nice current gen i7, so or even like a 7th gen, to do like a 7700K. 12 gigs DDR4 or 16 gigs DDR4 with a 1060 video card, the way most people would build it, it's gonna be close to $1,000. Okay, so real quick, I'm gonna wipe this down a little. This one is not filthy. Typically, you're not gonna get these absolutely filthy unless they were used in a really dirty environment. They're new enough that they're not brand new, but they're not ancient either, so it's not like something that's sat in someone's office for 10 years. These are only a few years old, so they're usually mildly dusty. Again, unless they're used, sometimes you'll see ones that are used in like you know, you get like a woodworking shop, then these are like the, or like a metal shop, and these are running like the CNC machine or something like that. You'll get them absolutely dirty, but normal office ones will have a little bit of dust here and there, but nothing excessive. Sometimes they'll be immaculate, though. Sometimes you'll get ones that were really well maintained by an IT department, and they'll be absolutely immaculate. Okay. I think we're good to go there. So, to pull the power supply on this unit, first you're going to want to unplug everything, and it looks like... doesn't look like we have any zip ties to undo either. So you've got your standard 24 pin right here, unplugged. Standard 4 pin right here, unplugged. And your SATA for your hard drive and your CD drive. So this has 4 screws on the back. A little bit of dust there. So there are 4 screws on the back. Standard, this is completely standard. This is a standard form factor ATX power supply. I do not believe that there is anything proprietary about the power supply on this unit. There's nothing hinky about it, so it should be replaceable as you see fit. Some of these they do, some of these will have proprietary ones, but this particular model doesn't. I think Dell was one of the last manufacturers to switch to proprietary power supplies on their business grade units. I believe starting with 4th gen, so the next generation after this, they do have proprietary. So this is a solid unit if you want to get them, if you can find one for cheap. Again, I think the 4th generation units after this, I think you have to use the Dell power supply, which definitely limits you on upgradability. And then to pull it out, let's see, can you see this? Oh, you can't quite see it. Okay, there's a little tab right here. It pushes down, and then the power supply just kind of pulls back and lifts out. You definitely do want to make sure when you buy a power supply for it that it's not an oversized power supply. So sorry on the slightly hinkiness on the recording. For some reason, even with my higher performance memory card, my camera seems to only let me do so much recording at a time. Anyway, though, so most power supplies are going to be this form factor unless you get an extremely high wattage oversized one. But just be aware of that. You could probably fit something a little bit longer in here than the factory one, but if you try, it'll butt up against this, and that could be a problem in some cases. So I'm actually replacing it with another Dell power supply, but a much higher wattage and more capable unit, specifically a unit with, it's basically the same, the only gain is, the most important part of all, 2 6-pin PCIe plugs, which this 1063 gig only needs one 6-pin, so this is a little bit more even than this needs, but I don't have anything lower end on hand that would still meet the needs, so I'm going to end up just doing this. If anyone's curious, for reference, the power supply I am installing right now is the power supply out of a XPS 8700 4th gen unit. And the 8700 is a standard power supply because it's a consumer grade unit, but I believe, like I said before, on Dell's, starting with Dell's 4th gen business grades, I believe they went to a specialty proprietary. Even on the lower end Optiplexes, I believe that's the case as well. And we hook it back up. the same exact way that we unplugged it. Connections on this are pretty much, and capabilities are pretty much identical. The only difference being it has two 6-pin PCIe's, which are the most important part for the video card upgrade. If you're really in a bind and don't have access to anything better, in theory, you could probably use a SATA to PCIe 6-pin and get away with it. I'd have to do the calculations, and it would depend on the usage case. If you're in a situation where every single component is running at its peak, it might be a bad idea. But if you're in a situation where either you've got a lower power draw processor, the 3770 that I have in here is a reasonably high draw compared to other chips of the generation, but if you've got a lower power draw chip, say you've got like a 3770S in your machine, which is the lower power usage, and you've got, say, like a 1050 Ti, but you've got one of those ones that does have external power requirements, you could probably get away with doing it. I wouldn't recommend it if you have a power supply like this laying around, but if you absolutely have to, again, you could probably get away with it. So I like to make this as clean as possible. Just kind of run these through so I can zip tie them later and hide them. I like to wipe the cables down too. The cables do collect a little bit of dust. You always gotta be careful with USB 3.0. Just like what happened here, if you don't line them up perfectly, it's really easy to bend a pin in it. I don't know why. USB 3.0, this has always been a problem. 2.0, it never really was. It is worth noting, I do always recommend, if you can, use the hard-mounted USBs. I think power delivery is a little better on 3.0 than 2.0, but I still always recommend, if you can swing it, run your device, run the cable to your device, especially USB-powered hard drives. I would always recommend going to the hard board-mounted ports. I find it works better in most cases. And you're less likely to have problems. It's not a guarantee. I mean, sometimes they work fine. Usually they work fine. But as a best practice, I always recommend using board-mounted USB ports when you have a situation where you're drawing a lot of power. So, the card we're putting in here today is actually one of the nicer 1063 gigs that I ever get my hands on. This is an EVGA, and I actually like this design. It has a good, solid look to it. Some of them have really a chintzy look to them, but these do not. These have a good look to them. It is worth mentioning you should be able to fit a slightly larger card than this. In the past, that would have been an upgrade issue, but now you can generally find, other than the absolute most bleeding edge cards, which if you're trying to put, I mean, come on, if you're trying to put a $900 video card in a system like this, I mean, get a life. But For anything up to like a 1080, I know Zotac has a 1080 that's about the same size as this 1060. They also have a 1070 that's about the same size, and I think there might be a few others on the market that are similar. Zotac's kind of the one that comes to mind. But you could certainly get up to a 1080 that will fit in this space. Absolutely. Okay, so, just for reference, I'm not going to show it because this is pretty self-explanatory. We're going to be upgrading our RAM with 2 more 4 gig sticks for a total of 12 gigs. And then we're also going to be doing a ADATA 240 gig drive. Not the greatest. I mean, I know they don't quite compare to the Samsungs, but I've used, I think, 10 of these ADATAs now, and I have not had any complaints yet. Usually a system like this isn't going to be able to take advantage of the absolute most bleeding edge fast drives out there, so you're not really going to get the benefit of going with a super high-end SSD anyway, so it doesn't really matter. I'm trying to think. Yeah, no, there's nothing else really of note here. That's your upgradability and your kind of factory configuration. Feel free to leave comments or questions in the comments. I will try to answer them as I can. What was I going to say? Oh, also, it is worth noting this is effectively the same computer as an Optiplex 3010. I don't think there's any changes to the board. I believe it's the same motherboard. I could be wrong on that. It might be slightly different, but it is. But if it is, it's not by much. But I think it's the exact same board. So anyway, if you're looking to do a teardown on one of those, this obviously applied to that. The only difference I have found between this and the Optiplex is this front panel. I honestly think the front panel on the Precision is nicer looking. It's a little more complicated. It has a little more of a industrial design to it, as it's supposed to, because this is supposed to be more or less an industrial grade computer. But aside from that, they're the same basic unit. Again, feel free to leave questions or comments, and I hope everybody found this interesting, and thanks for watching the video.